Rain hammered the hospital roof like it wanted in. I stood inside the ER with blood soaked through my jeans, clutching my daughter's limp hand. My fingers trembled so hard, I almost dropped her. Lila's skin was pale lips bluish and her breathing shallow. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts, just the flat beep of machines and nurses yelling codes in the distance. When the receptionist asked for our insurance, I opened my cracked phone and tried dialing the one person who might still care my mother. The phone rang twice. She picked up with that voice clipped and cold like she was already irritated. I said, "Mom, it's me. Lila's been in an accident. She needs surgery. Please, I need someone to co-sign." There was a pause. Then she said, "It's not our problem anymore, Eliza. You chose this path." Her words hung in the air like fog. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, the battery icon flashing red. Blood was still running down Lila's arm. A nurse came, her voice urgent. "Ma'am, we can't proceed without insurance approval. Do you have a family member who can co-sign?" I just shook my head because I didn't. They had all turned their backs on me years ago. I was shaking so hard that when the clipboard was handed to me, the pen slipped right out of my fingers. I signed anyway, my signature barely legible, smearing blood on the page. The nurse looked at me with practiced pity and left. I sat on one of those molded plastic chairs that dig into your back. Around me, families were huddled, husbands rubbing their wives' shoulders, kids wrapped in blankets, grandparents whispering prayers. I sat there alone, soaked in rain, and my daughter's blood hands pressed together like maybe that would stop them from shaking. The lights above buzzed faintly, and I realized I hadn't taken a breath in what felt like minutes. I could still hear Lila's voice from that morning. "Mommy, you're the whole sky to me," I whispered back, even though she couldn't hear me now. And what was I to her now, sitting useless in a waiting room while people who were supposed to love us turned their backs? I stared at the automatic doors, half hoping someone would walk through, but no one did. The family I had spent years trying to please, gone. Just like that. I tried calling my brother next. He picked up but didn't even say hello. He just said, "Are you really going to start this again?" Begging like you're the only one with problems. I told him what happened. He laughed, bitter and mean. "Don't drag us down, Eliza. You made your bed, lie and it's see yeah. Then he hung up. That was the last call I made that night. I looked down at my hands. There was blood dried in the cracks of my palms. The sleeves of my coat were soaked through, and I couldn't tell where the rain ended and Lila's blood began. I could still hear the monitors down the hall. I whispered to the empty chair beside me, "Somebody please, help us." But nobody came. Not until a stranger sat down next to me, quiet and composed like she had been waiting for this exact seat in this exact moment. "You look like you could use someone on your side," she said. Her voice calm, steady, like a fireplace in the dead of winter. I turned slowly, and for the first time that night, I saw a face that didn't look through me. She didn't flinch at the blood, the tears, the mess. She just nodded once and said, "I'm here now." Her name, I'd learn later, was Vera Langford. But that night, she was simply the only human who saw me as something other than a mistake. I didn't know yet how she would change everything. I didn't even know if I wanted her help. All I knew was that in a room full of strangers, someone had finally chosen to sit beside me. My name is Eliza Connors. I'm 33 years old, a single mother, and until that night in the ER, I thought I had managed to build a life worth surviving. I work as a freelance journalist, not glamorous, definitely not profitable. My beat is local culture, historic homes, forgotten libraries, untold immigrant stories in Boston's South End. I write about people no one else has time for, and somehow that felt like a calling. But calling doesn't pay rent. I picked up gigs tutoring ESL students in the evenings and worked weekends at a used bookstore. It was barely enough. Still, it was my life and I was proud of it. I hadn't spoken to my family in over 2 years before the night in the ER. They considered me a disappointment. A college-educated woman who married a sculptor refused to go corporate and chose love over money. When my husband Noah died of pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, I thought maybe they'd soften. They didn't. They said I brought it all on myself. That's the refrain I heard the last time I showed up to a family gathering and left in tears. You chose this life. It became their excuse to erase responsibility to stand back and watch as I tried to patch my life together with broken tape. Lila, my daughter, is 6. She's the center of my world. She has her father's eyes, that soft blue that turns gray when she's tired. She loves rainstorms and lemon cake and reading books far too advanced for her age. Her backpack is always a mess, but she sings to herself when she thinks no one's listening. The night of the accident, we had just left her art class. She was painting a mural of a flying whale. I remember that because she had asked Mom, "Can whales live in the sky if they believe hard enough?" I told her anything is possible when your eyes stay open. The truck came out of nowhere. I don't even remember the impact, just the sound glass and metal, and my scream muffled under the sound of tires skidding through puddles. When I came to, I was already carrying her. My knees were scraped, but I couldn't feel it. Her small head lolled against my chest as I ran through traffic, waving down the first car that would stop. I thought we'd made it. I thought getting to the hospital would be the hard part. But hospitals ask questions before they give you answers. Insurance consent form signatures. The receptionist never looked at Lila, just at me, and the blood soaking into the paperwork. That's when I realized I was alone. I was always alone. The years of strained phone calls, silences at holiday dinners, the cold stares when I showed up with a child but no financial plan. My family wasn't strict, they were strategic. My mother ran a real estate firm and prided herself on keeping things clean: her nails, her image, her social calendar. My brother Damien followed in her footsteps. He managed wealth for other people and enjoyed reminding me how much money I wasn't making. They didn't disown me. They just erased me the way one deletes a contact they never planned to call. And still, when Lila was wheeled into that ER barely breathing, I called them. Because I thought maybe tragedy would cut through pride. It didn't. That's the part that breaks something inside you. Not the words they say, but the confirmation of who you've always suspected they were. I stared at the screen as my mother's words echoed back. It's not our problem anymore. I heard them even louder than the nurses around me, louder than the beeping monitors. I thought about every choice I had made, every birthday party I scraped together, every late night of work just to buy school supplies, every time I swallowed my pride and smiled through loneliness for the sake of Lila. And still, somehow, that wasn't enough to count as family. I wanted to disappear, but I couldn't. Because in the OR, behind those sterile double doors, my daughter was fighting for her life. And I didn't even have the power to sign the paper that could save her. That's the truth they never show you in movies. Sometimes it's not a villain or a disease that tries to take your child. It's bureaucracy, it's policies, it's the absence of people who should have had your back. And in that moment, I was just another name on a form with no safety net and no voice left to scream. That's who I was before she sat beside me. That's who I had become. A mother stripped down to desperation, clinging to a wet handkerchief, and a prayer no one else could hear. The hours that followed were a blur of cold chairs, forms I couldn't fill, and nurses too busy to look me in the eye. My jeans were stiff with dried blood, my hands cracked from rubbing them together. I watched the rain smear the glass of the ER doors and waited for a miracle. A nurse finally came over, clipboard in hand, and asked, "Is there anyone else you can call? We can't proceed without consent or payment clearance." I could barely speak. My voice was raw from pleading. My mother had already made it clear I was on my own. But I tried one last time. I called Damien, my brother. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. He sighed before I even said a word. I told him what happened. He didn't ask how Lila was, didn't ask if I was okay. He just said, "Why are you making this public, Eliza?" "You want people to see us as heartless." I told him the hospital wouldn't operate unless someone co-signed. His voice dropped. "You should have planned better. You always expect handouts." "No wonder Mom cut you off." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him this wasn't about pride or money or appearances. This was about a child bleeding out on a table while her family debated whether she was worth the cost. But I said nothing. I just hung up. The nurse was still waiting. I shook my head. She nodded mechanically and walked away. I watched her back retreat down the hallway and felt my stomach knot. I had no one left to call. I leaned forward in my chair, buried my face in my hands, and let the room spin. Around me, families brought in coffee for each other. People cried, prayed, hugged. I had never felt more outside the definition of family than I did in that moment. Lila's words from earlier that day played over and over. Mommy, you're the whole sky to me. But I couldn't be the sky. I couldn't even be the floor beneath her. I was a crack no one wanted to fix. A nurse approached again, voice, stiff eyes, tired. Ma'am, if you can't provide a guarantor, they'll need to move her to critical care holding. It's not ideal. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Just a rasp, a whisper of defeat. Please, someone help. She hesitated, then turned away. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor, joining the sound of machines and soft weeping from other corners. I stood up and wandered down the hallway, not knowing where I was going. I ended up outside the chapel, but couldn't go in. My knees wouldn't carry me. I leaned against the wall, thinking maybe if I just closed my eyes, I'd wake up. Then my phone buzzed again. A voicemail, my mother's voice. If you keep humiliating us like this, don't expect to ever come back. You made your bed when you married that man and had that child. We don't owe you anything. Not anymore. Her words were clear. Her tone clipped. Final. I saved the message. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted proof I hadn't imagined the cruelty. Maybe I already knew I'd need it. 5 minutes later, Damien sent a text. Stop calling, Mom's furious. You're acting hysterical. Do what you always do, figure it out without dragging us with you. I read it once, twice. Then I turned the phone off. The silence after that was loud, deafening. I made my way back to the ER lobby and collapsed into the chair, trembling. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Lila would make it through the night. All I knew was that I was alone. Completely, undeniably, unforgivably alone. That's when she sat down beside me. Again, no words at first. Just the quiet presence of someone who didn't flinch. I didn't even look up until she pressed something into my hand. A white handkerchief. Soft. Clean. Embroidered with the initials VL. I stared at it like it was the first solid object in a dream. Her voice came next. Calm. Steady. You look like you could use someone on your side. I nodded. Just a twitch of my head. The tears had already dried on my face, but something broke again at the sound of her voice. Not because she offered a solution, but because she didn't ask what I had done to deserve this. She didn't ask who was at fault. She didn't ask why I was alone. She just stayed. That's what made her different. Everyone else wanted to know who to blame. She only cared that I wasn't left to shatter alone. I held the handkerchief tighter, and for the first time in hours, I took a breath that didn't burn. She didn't look like someone who changed lives. No spotlight followed her. No entourage trailed behind. She sat beside me like we were old friends, like it was natural to sit shoulder to shoulder with a stranger drenched in blood and heartbreak. Her name was Vera Langford. I didn't know that at first. I didn't know she was one of the most powerful philanthropists in the Northeast, or that she had more money than my entire neighborhood combined. That night she looked like any other woman who had lost sleep over something that mattered. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose knot, her black coat tailored but not flashy. There was a quiet elegance to her, the kind that whispered strength without needing to prove anything. She watched the hallway with calm eyes, like she'd sat in places like this before. I didn't speak for a long time. My voice had dissolved into the air somewhere between desperation and rage. But she didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch. Let me breathe. Let the machines beep and the lights flicker without trying to fix the unbearable. Finally, I asked, "Why are you sitting here?" She didn't smile. Just said, "Because no one should sit alone when they're losing everything." I blinked, not sure if I should thank her or ask her to leave. My instincts had been hardened by years of being watched, judged, rejected. People didn't do things for free. Kindness usually came with a cost. But Vera didn't ask for my story. She didn't prod for information. She just handed me a warm cup of tea a nurse had brought as if she knew I hadn't eaten in 12 hours. Her phone stayed in her pocket. Her eyes stayed on mine. "You're not a charity case," she said. "You're a mother." That's all that matters tonight. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe there were people like that. People who stepped into storms without umbrellas not because they had to, but because they remembered what it felt like to drown. She stood up once to speak to the nurse at the front desk. I didn't hear what she said. The nurse disappeared down the hallway, and Vera sat back down. No drama, no announcement. I asked her, "You don't even know me. Why would you care?" Her voice dropped lower. "Years ago, I sat where you're sitting. Not in this hospital, but another one. My daughter had collapsed at school. I arrived late, traffic was bad. When I got there, they wouldn't treat her until I showed a card. The insurance card had expired 2 days before. They made me sit in a room while she struggled to breathe. Her hands trembled just slightly as she spoke. I had money, but it didn't matter that night. It was too late. My stomach clenched. I didn't know what to say." She continued, "After that, I started a fund. Quiet, anonymous. It's not about saving everyone. It's about making sure one mother doesn't have to face what I did." I looked at her, really looked, and suddenly the power behind her presence made sense. She wasn't here for recognition. She was here because she knew what it meant to be powerless. I opened my mouth to protest, to say I wasn't looking for a handout, but she cut me off gently. "This isn't charity, this is a lifeline, and it's yours." I could feel the words building in my throat, but they never came out. I just clutched the handkerchief she gave me, trying to absorb the impossible reality that someone, anyone, had decided I was worth saving. I whispered, "Thank you." It was the first thing I'd said that night that didn't feel like a scream. Vera just nodded. Her eyes didn't soften because they were never hard. They were steady. She wasn't here to pity me. She was here to sit beside me until I could stand on my own again. And somehow, that was enough to make the walls stop closing in. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt the weight shift just slightly off my shoulders. Not gone, but shared. I don't know how long we sat there in silence after that, but it was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. I sipped the tea Vera gave me, the warmth of it spreading slowly through the numb cold in my chest. I kept expecting her to leave to say her piece and vanish like every other person who dropped in with good intentions, but no staying power. But she stayed. When the nurse returned with new forms and a slight shift in her posture, I knew something had changed. She said quietly, "We've got a temporary guarantor on file now. We're moving forward with the surgery." My eyes shot to Vera. She didn't say a word, just met my gaze with that same calm stillness. I didn't ask how she did it. I didn't ask what she had signed. My body slumped with the weight of relief. I should have cried. I didn't. Not then. The tears had retreated somewhere too deep. I whispered, "I can't pay you back." She shook her head. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" I asked, because it didn't make sense. In my world, help always came with a hook. A favor owed, a debt waiting. Her answer was so simple it hurt. "It's something I wish someone had done for me." I stared at her, trying to see the full picture behind her face. She looked like the kind of woman who never needed help. She wore control like perfume, but the pain was there, etched in the corners of her mouth. Her fingers twisted gently around the strap of her purse as she continued. "After my daughter died, I spent years donating to foundations, funding research, building wings of hospitals with our name on it. But none of that erased the memory of sitting alone while she choked on her own lungs. The silence was back, heavier now, but she didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady. I realized one day that the money wasn't helping the people I wanted to help. It was building plaques, legacy walls, not lives. So I started something different. Quiet support. One mother at a time. One hospital room at a time. I didn't have words. I looked at her, this woman who carried the loss of a daughter like an invisible scar, and understood that this wasn't pity. This wasn't charity. This was grief reshaped into grace. She said, "You don't owe me anything. What you do for your daughter, that's the repayment. Be her mother. Keep going. That's all I want." I gripped the handkerchief again, my voice barely audible. I've spent so long being told I wasn't enough. By family, by friends, by systems. Vera leaned in slightly. "Then let me remind you, they were all wrong." The way she said it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to lift me like some motivational speech. It was just true. And I felt it settle in the air between us like a fact I had forgotten how to believe. I didn't know then how much more I would need her. I didn't know what storms were coming. But in that moment, Vera Langford sat beside me, not as a savior, not as a billionaire, but as a woman who once sat where I was and had chosen to stay. I thought the worst was over once the surgery was approved. I thought maybe, just maybe, my daughter's survival would bring some kind of peace. But peace wasn't something my family ever gave without a price. The next morning, I checked my phone, expecting maybe a message from the surgeon or the hospital billing department. Instead, I saw a voicemail from my mother and a missed call from Damien. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Then I pressed play. Her voice, always sharp now, had a practiced coldness. If you think you can accept money from strangers and not face consequences, think again. I've already spoken with legal counsel. If you can't provide for that child without handouts, we'll be pursuing custody. The word custody clanged through my skull. The air left my lungs. I listened again, hoping I had misheard. But no, she said it with full clarity. They were coming for my daughter. That night, Vera met me in the hospital cafeteria. She slid a small folder across the table. Inside were business cards, legal referrals, and a printout of rights related to guardianship challenges. She didn't speak right away, just let me absorb the weight of what was happening. When I finally looked up, I asked, "What happens if they win?" Vera didn't blink. "Then we fight smarter." She had already anticipated this, already drawn up scenarios. I don't know when she started working behind the scenes, but it was clear she'd been preparing for a battle I didn't even know I was about to enter. My hands were trembling again, but this time not from helplessness, this time from rage. "I thought they didn't care," I whispered. "I thought they wanted me gone." Vera's lips tightened. "They don't want the child. They want control. And they don't want to look like villains in public." The next day, I received a certified letter. Emergency custody petition filed, Isolde Connors versus Eliza Connors. Isolde, my mother, wasn't just threatening anymore. She had filed paperwork. The basis: financial instability, emotional unfitness, and recent reliance on external unknown benefactors. She was building a case, not on who I was, but on what she could make me look like. I remembered the time I handed her guardianship papers when I had postpartum depression, and Noah was in hospice care. She was supposed to help temporarily while I recovered. She never returned those papers. Now she was using them to claim I was unfit. I sank to the hospital chapel floor and cried for the first time since the accident. Not because I was afraid to fight, but because I was already so tired. Vera found me again. This time she said nothing. She just placed a legal pad in front of me and said, "Start writing down everything. Dates, conversations, transfers, payments, everything. We need evidence." Over the next 48 hours, I began building my case. I pulled bank statements showing how I had sent my family money regularly after Noah died. Money that had gone into luxury expenses, not care for Lila. I found messages, voicemails, texts, receipts. Every cruel word became a piece of proof. Vera helped me organize it all. I didn't ask how she knew so much about family court procedures. I just followed her guidance. Meanwhile, the hospital cleared Lila for post-op monitoring. Her condition was stable, but she couldn't be moved far. I applied for temporary guardianship confirmation. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing. When I walked into that courthouse, I saw my mother already seated wearing a navy coat, and that same look of permanent disapproval she wore at every life event she disapproved of. Damien sat behind her holding a leather folder, eyes avoiding mine. Vera stood beside me as I handed over the documents. The judge read them quietly. I presented voice messages, including one where my mother explicitly stated, "If you take money from strangers, don't expect to ever come back to this family." Her voice filled the courtroom. I turned slowly and looked at her. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. Damien's smirk faded when I presented the financial records. payments I had made for household bills that were redirected to his private vacation fund. I lifted my chin. Your Honor, this isn't about what's best for my daughter. It's about punishing me for leaving the image they built. Vera stepped in then, calm and precise. Ms. Connors has demonstrated a consistent pattern of self-sacrifice, financial responsibility, despite limited means, and most importantly, protective care for her daughter in times of crisis. Isolde Connors and her son have used prior guardianship documents not as a safety net, but as a weapon. The judge nodded slowly. He paused, reviewing the stack of papers. Then he said the words I had been waiting for. This case will require full investigation. Until such time, custody remains with the mother. I didn't breathe until we left the building. Outside, Vera placed a hand on my shoulder. That was the first battle. There will be more. I nodded, the rage inside me hardening into resolve. They thought they could erase me with paperwork. They had no idea what I was willing to do to protect my daughter. They still saw me as the broken girl who had failed in their eyes. But I had become something else. I had become a mother with nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. The courthouse had high ceilings and cold air that smelled like paper and stress. After the hearing, I went home with Lila, who was discharged that same evening under strict recovery guidelines. She slept most of the day groggy from pain meds, unaware of the war unfolding around her. I stayed up all night with a folder open on the kitchen table. Vera's instructions clear in my head. Build a wall of facts they can't climb. I started from the beginning. Every deposit I had sent to my family since Noah's diagnosis, every receipt, every text asking for help, and every cold reply I received. I printed screenshots, labeled each entry color-coded timelines. I became a historian of my own pain. I reviewed voice messages, the ones I'd kept, not out of nostalgia but out of habit. I played one where Damien said, "You can't just expect us to clean up your mess every time you fall apart." Another where my mother said, "You've embarrassed this family for the last time." I saved them all. I made backups. Vera brought over a flash drive and helped me organize everything into legal categories. She connected me with an advocate from a family defense organization who helped me draft a countersuit for financial misconduct. It wasn't just about proving I could care for Lila. It was about exposing the motives behind their so-called concern. I discovered that the money I'd sent to cover Grandma's medication actually paid for a private golf membership for Damien. That the grocery allowance I gave when I was working 3 jobs went into a cruise deposit. My family wasn't just neglectful. They were thieves dressed in expensive smiles. Vera reviewed every document I collected. She had an eye for strategy. When I felt overwhelmed, she made tea and told me to rest. When I doubted myself, she reminded me who I was. Not a failure, not a charity case, a mother who refused to fold. I created a secure cloud folder labeled "Just in Case" and shared it with Vera and the legal aid team. One night, after Lila had fallen asleep and the apartment was quiet, I recorded a video. I didn't plan it. I just turned the camera on and started speaking. My name is Eliza Connors. I'm a mother and I'm fighting for my daughter. I laid it all out. The abandonment, the threats, the lies. I didn't cry. My voice cracked, but I didn't look away from the lens. I ended the video with this: "If anything happens, let this be the truth they can't erase." I sent it to my attorney and a trusted friend. The next morning, I woke up to another certified letter. A new hearing was scheduled this time, with new evidence submitted by my mother's attorney. I showed up at court with Vera, my file folder, and fire in my chest. My mother's lawyer stood and introduced a document I hadn't seen before, a guardianship transfer signed by me during my postpartum breakdown. I remembered that day. I was sleep-deprived, widowed, and hadn't eaten in 24 hours. They told me it was temporary, just paperwork to help with daycare registration. I had signed it trusting them. Now they were waving it like a weapon. I stood holding my own folder. "Your Honor, I have supplemental evidence." I approached the bench and submitted transaction logs, messages, and my video recording. The judge reviewed the flash drive while Vera explained the sequence of financial exploitation. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. My mother sat stone-faced. Damien tapped his pen like a drumbeat of arrogance. Then I played the voicemail, her voice hissing through the speakers. If you take money from strangers, don't ever show your face to us again. The courtroom was quiet. No one moved. I followed up with financial records showing they'd misused over $12,000, sent for childcare school fees and emergencies. The funds were redirected to vacations, shopping, and personal investments. I looked at the judge, my voice clear. This wasn't about Lila's safety. This was about erasing me. About control. My mother shot up, shouting, "You ungrateful girl." After everything we've done for you, I turned, voice low but steady. What you've done is feed off my struggle. You called me a burden while cashing every check I sent. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. This court will take recess for review. I stepped out into the hallway, air sharp in my lungs, hands trembling not from fear, but from release. Vera stood beside me. You did it, she said quietly. Not yet, I replied. But I'm not done. That day I learned something important. Dignity doesn't scream. It doesn't need applause. It builds its case, walks into court, and refuses to look away. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was reclaiming my name, my truth, my voice. And for the first time in years, I knew I was going to win. Not because I had more money, more power, or a cleaner history, but because I had finally stopped asking for permission to be heard. When court reconvened, the judge's voice was calmer but firmer. He reviewed the new evidence, acknowledged the prior guardianship document, but questioned its context and use. He noted the financial inconsistencies, the recorded threats, the clear pattern of manipulation. My mother tried to speak again, this time with crocodile tears and soft-toned regrets, but the words didn't land the way she wanted. The courtroom had already heard the truth in her own voice, cold, clipped, and merciless. Damien kept his head down. The smirk he wore before was gone. The judge ordered an independent child welfare assessment and stated clearly that until that was completed, full custody would remain with me. Outside, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I stood tall and still, like the part of me that had been frozen for years had finally thawed into steel. Vera walked beside me to the parking lot, the winter sun catching the silver in her hair. She didn't say much, just handed me the handkerchief again, now neatly folded and clean. I took it not because I needed it, but because it had become something else, a marker, a symbol, not of charity, but of quiet power. I drove Lila home that night. She held my hand the entire ride, sleepy from medicine, but smiled when we passed the bookstore I used to work at. "Mommy, can we go there again soon?" she asked. I nodded. Of course, baby, soon. At home, I made soup-folded laundry and answered emails from my editor, who was still waiting on an article I'd promised 3 weeks ago. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was rebuilding. Vera stopped by with groceries and legal forms. We finalized the protective order to block further harassment from my mother. I signed the document with a hand that no longer trembled. That night, I lit a candle and placed it on the windowsill. Not for ceremony, just for warmth. I set the handkerchief next to it and whispered, "We're safe." I tucked Lila into bed and kissed her forehead. Her breathing was calm, peaceful, and mine. No court, no paper. No voice message could take that from me again. The next morning, I received a call from the investigator assigned to our case. She told me off the record that my mother and brother were now under financial review for potential misappropriation of funds. I hung up and stared out the window, watching a group of kids walk past in winter coats. I thought about how many years I had spent apologizing for being someone I never needed to apologize for. How often I had begged for belonging when I had already built it quietly day by day in small apartments, grocery store aisles, bedtime stories. Vera came by that afternoon with a book Lila had wanted. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. She sat with me on the couch, sipped tea, and listened to the sound of a home that was still standing. Later that night, my mother called again. I let it ring, then blocked the number. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. The chain had snapped. I didn't need to prove anything to people who never intended to see me clearly. All I needed was right here, my daughter, my voice, my truth, and a stranger who became my witness. That was more than enough. Days passed. The air turned warmer. Lila's strength returned slowly in quiet bursts. A skipped step, a laugh at breakfast, a question about the stars. I watched her carefully memorizing the color in her cheeks and the light in her eyes, knowing how close I had come to losing all of it. One evening, while she drew in her notebook, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. For the first time in months, I wrote for myself. Not for an assignment, not for rent. I wrote our story. I didn't name names. I didn't seek revenge. I wrote about what it feels like to be invisible and then seen, to be broken and still whole, to be a mother not because it's easy, but because it's right. I titled it, When Silence is No Longer Safety. I hit publish and closed the laptop, not thinking about clicks or likes. It wasn't for them. It was for me. That weekend, Lila and I visited the park. She ran toward the swing's legs, pumping laughter ringing through the crisp morning. I sat on the bench with a cup of coffee, the sun warm on my shoulders. Vera appeared beside me with no announcement as always. She sat down and watched Lila soar. After a while, she said quietly, "You did this." I didn't argue. I just nodded. Because I had. Not alone. But still. That night, I placed the white handkerchief back into its drawer next to Lila's baby bracelet and an old photo of Noah. It wasn't just a cloth anymore. It was a reminder that kindness can change everything, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits beside you and waits. My phone buzzed. A message from the legal aid team. The court had closed the investigation. Custody fully affirmed. Case closed. I stared at the screen until the words settled. I was free. Not from the past, not from scars, but from the need to prove myself to people who had never listened. I tucked Lila in with a soft whisper. We're safe. Tomorrow we start living. And this time we do it on our terms. No apologies. No permission. Just the quiet power of knowing who we are and never letting anyone take that away again.